Well, Judges chapter 13. Let's take a look at the life of Samson. And I don't know about your experience growing up with the story of Samson, but for me, it didn't really matter what my teacher said. I was so excited that there's a real life example of He-Man, right? And my poor Bible class teacher spent my entire childhood growing up trying to say, yes, he was strong, but was he a man of character? Yes, he was strong, but he kind of did things that you don't want to emulate. And that's been the love-hate relationship of Samson for my whole life. It's been, yes, look at what God has given him, and yet look at the character of his life, right? You've grown up with those stories too, right? You've read this text, you recognize some of the depth. Okay. I want to take a look at the calling of Samson. We're just going to look at the birth narrative here. We're going to look at a little bit more of Samson's life later. So chapter 13 is mostly where we're going to be parked. And I want to suggest that, that the birth narrative tells us something about Samson that should set him up for greatness. The last two judges that we've looked at in the book, I'm using scare quotes because I'm not really sure we want to call Abimelech a judge. But the last two major characters in the book of Judges are interesting. One has the upbringing of a king, but he is nothing like what God calls for a judge. The other one didn't grow up with his people, was rejected by his people. He grew up, did great things on behalf of Israel, but his ignorance led him to some terrible, tragic choices in leading the people of Israel. And then you get to Samson. And by all accounts, he should have launched perfectly. But he launched like a Scud missile. Is that about it? Yeah. Let's take a look. Judges chapter 13, starting with verse 1. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and so the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. There was a certain man of Zorah, of the tribe of Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, Behold, you are barren, and you have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Time out. This sounds promising, doesn't it? We're in familiar territory right now, right? Really good things happen when there's a barren woman and an angel that appears and says, Behold, you've been barren, but you're going to bear a son, right? This we're talking Abraham, right? Okay, okay. All right, just make sure we're tracking here. This is Israel. This is their history, right? This is a good pronouncement. He says, And an angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, Behold, you are barren and you have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Therefore be careful and drink no wine or strong drink and eat nothing unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb. And he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. Then the woman came and told her husband, A man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of an angel. Actually, let's just pause there. I'll continue on in just a second. So you have this angel that appears, and he says, I know you're barren, but you're gonna bear a son. And he doesn't say that Samson actually delivers them from the Philistines, but he says he's going to begin. Right? So he begins the work of delivery from the Philistines. I want to make sure that I say this in a way that sounds delicate, but is pointed enough for you to get it. I recognize that there is no Bible verse where the Bible says in book, chapter, and verse, life begins at the moment of conception and it exists in the mother's womb, right? But if you are somewhere meandering on how to interpret the turmoil of abortion or abortion rights, pro-life movement, the pro-choice movement. And you're somewhere in the persuasion of believing that parents have rights over their children because their children are not alive until they're born. I think this story has something to say about that. Okay? Before he is born, he's committed to the vow of being a Nazarite. He will be one his whole life. And because he is, it is now upon his mother to live in that way until she's given birth to Samson. Okay? This, see, my normal notes don't dim and have a splash screen. Okay. Okay, verse 6. And then the woman came and told her husband, a man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of the angel of God. Very awesome. I did not ask him where he was from, but he did not tell me his name. But he said to me, behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. So then drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. Then, verse 8, Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come again to us and teach us what to do with the child who will be born. And God listened to the voice of Manoah, and an angel of God came again to the woman as she sat in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. So the woman ran quickly and told her husband, behold, the man who had come to me the other day had appeared to me. And Manoah rose and went after his wife and came to the man and said to him, are you the man who spoke to this woman? And he said, I am. And Manoah said, now, when your words come true, what will be the child's manner of life, and what will be his mission? And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, of all that I have said to the woman, let her be careful. She may not eat of anything that comes from the vine, neither let her drink wine or strong drink or anything unclean that I have commanded, all that I have commanded her to observe. Now, there's a reason why Dad was brought into this, because under Jewish law, no child can undertake an oath except with the approval of his father. And so if this child is going to undertake an oath, it is done through the father's permission. Verse 15, Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, please let us detain you and prepare a young goat for you. And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, if you detain me, I will not eat your food, but if you prepare a burnt offering, then offer it to the Lord. For Manoah did not know that he was an angel of the Lord. And Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, what is your name? So that when your words come true, we may honor you. And the angel of the Lord said to him, why do you ask my name, seeing that it is wonderful? Do you recognize some of the other parallels with biblical material at this point? Right? So we're dancing all around a lot of biblical. You have the birth story of Isaac and the birth story of Ishmael. They were both foretold by angels. You have Jacob wrestling here, right? You've got all of these other stories that are part of Jewish heritage that are filing right in here to Samson's birth story and his birth narrative. They're asking his name. He's not going to tell him his name. He's not God. He's the angel, but they think he's God, right? All of this coming together. Don't offer me a sacrifice. So Manoah, verse 19, so Manoah took the young goat with the grain offering and offered it on the rock to the Lord, the one who works wonders. And Manoah and his wife were watching. And when the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord went up in the flame of the altar. Now Manoah and his wife were watching, and they fell on their knees to the ground. The angel of the Lord appeared no more to Manoah and to his wife. Then I lost it because my keyboard popped up. I'm telling you, this is miserable. Technology is not from the Lord, people. Just telling you this right now. Okay, all right. Let's just pick it up at verse 20 because I'm lost. Okay, 13 verse 20. And when the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord went up in the flame of the altar. And now Manoah and his wife were watching, and they fell on their faces to the ground. The angel of the Lord appeared no more to Manoah and his wife. Then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord. And Manoah said to his wife, "We shall surely die, for we have seen God." But his wife said to him, "If the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering at our hands, or show us all these things, or now announce to us such things as these." And the woman bore a son, and called his name Samson. And the young man grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him in Manan Dan, between Jorah and Eshtal. Okay, birth story of Samson. By every account, if you had a checklist, you're ticking off every single thing on the list, right? Everything that is good about every guy who was ever called to be faithful to the kingdom and the promise. This is Samson. And yet his life turns out to be anything but that. We end up teaching about Samson, and I spend half of my time trying to say, yeah, but he wasn't that great, right? Because for all of these strengths, for all of the birth narrative that sets him up to be a great person, we know later, spoiler alert, he has superhuman strength, right? But also, he has a weakness. Ladies are his kryptonite. Men, so say we all. Okay, but this is Samson's story, and he likes women, and he doesn't just like women, he really likes women, and he likes foreign women. And so no matter how many times previous to this moment God has said, go live among them, but don't take their wives to be your daughters or give your sons to their wives. No matter how many times God said, don't marry with these people. Well, Samson didn't start there, and he did marry them, but he started with prostitutes, and then he moved on to marrying these women, but he had no regard for what God said about being a holy people in the land of Israel, right? So Samson, just from the outset, he's been given this great task, he's been given this vow and this commission, and yet it seems like he's throwing it all away. Now, that's one complaint that I've heard, but let me tell you, I think that Samson also receives a very harsh treatment. The other accusation I've heard in almost every single Bible class that I've been in and some that I've taught has been not only was Samson not a good Israelite by intermarrying and doing all this other stuff, he was also not a good Nazarite. And here's why. If you're not familiar with the Nazarite vow, one of those requirements is that you cannot come in contact with a dead body. Are you familiar with the story of Samson? Okay. Did he come into contact with dead bodies? By the thousands, right? By the tens of thousands. Okay. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually spend a little bit of time looking at the Nazarite vow, since most of us are not actually familiar with the Nazarite vow, and I'd like to hopefully redeem a little bit about the calling, because and we need to do this from the birth narrative, because if Samson's calling from God is to begin the redemption of Israel against the hand of the Philistines, and he was given superhuman strength to do that, I would argue that his mighty feats on the battlefield and elsewhere are exactly what God was calling him to do. And so, it is inconsistent for God to call him to be a Nazarite and believe that Samson will live his whole life in violation of the vow that God calls him to. Okay? You see this tension? Okay, all right. Let's take a look at the Nazarite vow. We'll find that in Numbers chapter 6. Yeah, go ahead and turn there. We're going to be there a bit too. Oh, you and all your new tech. Here's how my tech works. Hope the Wi-Fi goes out right now. Kidding. Okay, I'm kidding. All right. Numbers chapter 6, starting with verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when either a man or a woman makes a special vow, the vow of a Nazarite, to separate himself from the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink. Let's unpack this just briefly. So a Nazarite vow is available for anyone, man or woman. They can undergo the vow at any time, right? They can choose to become a Nazarite vow, man or woman, to become a Nazarite, both man or woman. They take a special vow. It's called the vow of the Nazarite. By the way, that word Nazarite comes from the Hebrew word Nazir, which literally means to separate, to consecrate. It's very similar to the idea of holy. So you're separating yourself. So a Nazarite is somebody who's separated. Also, as an aside, but this needs to be said, is there a difference between a Nazarite and a Nazarene? Yes. A Nazarene is somebody who comes from the city of Nazareth. Jesus was a Nazarene. A Nazarite is somebody who takes on a station in life where they've withdrawn and separated themselves from the regular customs of life for a holy purpose to God. Okay? So, and he says, either a man or woman makes a special vow, the vow of a Nazarite, to separate himself to the Lord. He shall separate himself from wine and strong drink. And he shall make no vinegar made with wine or strong drink, and shall not drink any juice of grapes or eat grapes fresh or dried. All the days of his separation he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, not even the seeds or the skins. Okay, so everything associated with wine is out. That means everything from the grape to the grape leaves to grape juice to grape seeds to grapefruit, anything, separate yourself from it. Grapefruit's awful. Just saying. But not only that, the alcoholic element is also something that a Nazarite is supposed to be separated from. There's a cryptic word here that's translated strong drink. In some Bibles, it's translated beer. We don't really know what that means, but we know there were other ways to make alcoholic beverages with strong mash, and you may have. Last year I talked a little bit about that. So this is a complete elimination of alcohol and any grape product, right? That's what this is saying. None of either of these. All the days of his separation he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, not even the seeds or the skins. All the days of his vow of separation no razor shall touch his head, until the time is completed for which he separates himself to the Lord. He shall be holy. He shall let the locks of his hair on his head grow long. In fact, Jewish rabbis were so insistent on this that a Nazarite was not allowed to use a comb in his hair, because it may, ladies, it may tease out some hair. Okay? I clean out the shower drain. I know. Until all the days of his vow of separation, no razor shall touch his head until the time is completed for which he separates himself to the Lord. He shall be holy. He shall let the locks of his hair on his head grow long. Verse 6, chapter 6, verse 6 of Numbers. All the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body. Listen to this. Not even his father or his mother, for brother or sister, for if they die, he shall make himself unclean, because his separation to God is on his head. All the days of his separation he is to keep holy to the Lord. Verse 9, and if any man dies very suddenly beside him, and he defiles his consecrated head, then he shall shave his head on the day of his cleansing. On the 7th day he shall shave it. On the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons to the priest to the entrance of the tent meeting, and the priest shall offer one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering, and make atonement for him, because he sinned by reason of the dead body. In other words, it is so important that you do not come in contact with a dead body. You can do this accidentally. If your dad dies, sorry, mourn from a distance. If it's your brother, I'm sorry, grieve at length, right? But if you're walking along the road and your friend drops dead from a heart attack and he grabs your arm while he's going down, you broke your vow. It's that quick. Okay? And the priest shall offer one for sin and one for burnt offering and make atonement for him because he sinned by reason of the dead body. Verse 12, and he shall separate himself to the Lord for the days of his separation and bring a male lamb a year old as a guilt offering. But the previous period shall be void because the separation was defiled. Now, the Bible doesn't designate what exactly a time period is for separating yourself as a Nazarite, but the typical Nazarite was expected to start at a month. The rabbi said, if it's less than a month, it's not worth doing, right? A month or more. And you can get into a Nazarite vow simply by saying, I now consecrate myself to the Lord. In front of people, by yourself, really doesn't matter. But once you're in a Nazarite vow, and you have to say how long you're doing it for. And once you're in it, you're in it. It's very hard to get out of a Nazarite vow. He talks about this in a little bit. But if you defile yourself by touching a dead body, whatever that time period, was it 7 years, 10 years? Starts over. In fact, there's a story in the Talmud about a queen who was converted to Judaism, and her son went off to war, and she very zealously wanted him to come back healthy. And so she made a vow to the Lord to be a Nazarite for 7 years if her son comes back alive from war. He did come back alive, and she undertook her 7-year Nazarite vow. She went to the temple to shave her head. That's how one of the processes of finishing the vow is you shave your head in the temple. And when she arrived, several of the Pharisees said, wait, you made this vow in another country and you want to conclude it here at our temple? You can't do that. So she said, okay, and she stayed in Jerusalem for 7 more years to complete her vow. And just a month before finishing, she touched a dead body. She shaved her head and started again. And for 21 years, this woman kept her vow to the Lord with a shaved head 3 times. Okay? They meant business when they were talking about Nazarite vows. Interesting thing is, the Bible doesn't tell you what happens if a person's head gets shaved while they're under the vow. It doesn't tell you what happens if a person comes into contact with wine or strong drink when they're under the vow. The only caveat in the Bible is if you touch a dead body, you start over. Okay? To get out of a Nazarite vow is actually very, very expensive. Verse 13, and this is the law for the Nazarite. When the time of his separation has been completed, he shall be brought to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and he shall bring his gift to the Lord, 1 male lamb, a year old, without blemish, for a burnt offering, and 1 ewe, a year old. You know how the Jews tended to have a sliding scale? If you're not rich enough for this, you can do this. If you're not rich enough for this, you can do this. If you're not rich enough for this, you can do this. For sacrificial systems, it doesn't work with a Nazarite vow. You got to give it all of it. This is a very wealthy sacrifice. He shall bring his gift to the Lord, 1 male lamb, a year old, without blemish, for a burnt offering, 1 ewe, a lamb, a year old, without blemish, or as a sin offering, and 1 ram without blemish as a peace offering, and a basket of unleavened bread, loaves of fine flour mixed with oil, and unleavened wafers smeared with oil, and their grain offering and their drinks offering. Literally, you are offering every offering a Jewish person can do, and not just the small ones, the big kahuna gifts. Right? And the priest shall bring them before the Lord and offer his sin offering and his burnt offering, and he shall offer the ram as a sacrifice for peace offering to the Lord with the basket of unleavened bread. The priest shall also offer its grain offering and its drink offering, and the Nazarite shall shave his consecrated head at the entrance of the tent of meeting. In the future, it's not the tabernacle, it becomes the temple, right? You finish your vow at the temple or the tabernacle. So he shall shave his consecrated head at the entrance of the temple of meeting, and shall take the hair from his consecrated head and put it on the fire that is in the sacrifice of the peace offering. Verse 19, and the priest shall take the shoulder of the ram when it is boiled in 1 pot of 1 unleavened loaf out of the basket and 1 of the unleavened wafer, and shall put them on the hands of the Nazarite after he has shaved his hair of consecration. And the priest shall wave them for a wave offering before the Lord. They are a holy portion for the priest, together with the breast that is waved. Verse 21. This is the law of the Nazarite. But if he vows an offering to the Lord above his Nazarite vow as he can afford, each in accordance with the vow that he takes, he shall do in addition to the law of the Nazarite. Being a Nazarite was no insignificant task. Nobody would undertake a Nazarite vow for a month because it took you years to save up for the cost of getting out of a Nazarite vow. Historical records tell us of the Jews that undertook Nazarite vows. They were kind of easy to spot. Do you know why? From the Jews that undertook Nazarite vows, there were some periods where they were considered so holy that the Jews allowed them to officiate. Probably shouldn't have. God doesn't tell them to do this, but they actually helped to officiate sometimes during their Nazarite vow in the temple as priests. When people ran across a Nazarite, they regularly gave them gifts, knowing that to get out of the Nazarite vow required a great sum of money. Jews today, by the way, do not believe anyone can undertake a Nazarite vow. Do you know why? There's no temple. You can't get out of it. The only Nazarites today that Jews believe can undertake a Nazarite vow are the ones who take it for life. No way to get out of it. Okay. And it was a big deal. And we know in the first century there were many people, men and women, who undertook Nazarite vows. It's recorded in lots of places outside of the Bible. Samson, interestingly enough, is the only one in the Bible that is actually recorded explicitly as taking a Nazarite vow. Everyone else, we have a couple other examples. We think probably that, let me make sure I've got all of my notes. We think that Samuel was probably a Nazarite, though it doesn't use that word for him because of the kind of oath that he was told, and he's not supposed to shave his head. And we think that John the Baptist may have also been a Nazarite, but again, we don't know. This is the worst idea. I hate this. Not this. Well, maybe that too, but... Okay, so we have a couple examples in the Bible of people being a Nazarite, but we have only Samson that is here committed to being a Nazarite. We know the text says he's a Nazarite from birth. It's an unusual oath. Everywhere else, a person who takes a Nazarite oath takes it of their own volition for a certain period of time, and they get out of it. But Samson was a Nazarite for life. Why is that important, you ask? Well, the only provision in the life of a Nazarite to have to restart their vow is if you come in contact with a dead body. Are you tracking? If your period for the vow is not 7 years or 10 years or 3 months or 6 months, but it is your whole life, you have the context where a man can undertake a vow to be a Nazarite. And actually, I know this sounds like I'm threading a needle, but I am telling you the technicalities of Jewish law. This is nothing compared to how Jewish rabbis actually interpreted this stuff. The technicality is, if you're a Nazarite for life, there is no way to restart the vow period because you're already there perpetually for life. And so God chose to raise up Samson and give him this vow that resets if you come in contact with a dead body, but it seems like he was given a commission to do exactly that, to go and lead Israel in warfare, in bloodshed, redeeming them from the Philistines. And he was given the Nazarite vow to do that. And I think, biblically, it's intentional. There is an intentional loophole in the text that allows him to be that person. And so, at a minimum, chew on the idea that when we throw Samson under the bus for being a womanizer, let's not necessarily throw everything else, because I think God specifically had a plan calling him for a Nazarite vow in the way he fulfilled it. But here's my question. This is one I've been chewing on actually for a long time. Why why would God use a Nazarite vow for this man as a judge? Why a Nazarite vow? Compare him to all the other judges that come before, and you have these men and women who rise up and they deliver God's people, and it seems to me that they have the ability to rally all of the people, and there's a pretty wholesale victory. Samson's story isn't like that at all. In fact, Samson isn't a leader of many people. Samson is this He-Man or She-Ra character, right, with huge muscles, and by the strength of his own physical prowess, he goes and he slays thousands of Philistines, but he doesn't rally the people. He doesn't lead an army. He doesn't accomplish this task like every other judge had done in the past. Samson's case is specifically unique. And Samson's gift of strength, we find out, spoiler alert, we find out later is attached to his hair. His hair being the symbol of his vow to God. Why? Why would God raise a judge and say, this judge can do things, but only if they consecrate themselves to me in the context of this vow? And as I've wrestled with this idea, why Samson, why a vow? I will tell you the reason I struggle with that is because I don't like vows. I don't have a good context for this idea of consecration at all. And you don't either. I grew up in a church context where I didn't know everything, but I knew that Christians did not undertake vows. Right? When I was a young guy preaching, it's kind of one of those things you just say things as a mannerism of speech. And I said, I swear I never did that. I swear I never did this. One little old lady was really frustrated with me, came up to me afterwards, and she said, stop saying that. Why? Because we do not swear. Well, I wasn't cursing. She's like, yeah, but we don't undertake oaths. And you know where she's coming from on this, right? And if I had been an older, more mature person, I would have probably not been snarky with her. But I asked her how in the world she got married without a vow. Okay, I've grown up in church my whole life being told Christians do not undertake vows. Christians do not undertake vows. Christians do not undertake vows. That's created so many degrees of separation from the context of Samson that I have very little understanding of what it is to be a Nazarite, to say that from here until here, my life will be consecrated. That's not even a word we use anymore, right? It will be consecrated to God. Consecration means to be set aside for a holy purpose. We barely have holiness down anymore. We think holiness is like an attribute of the strength of God, but it's not. Holiness is an attribute of God's differentiation from everything else. God is so wildly different than anything else that you know. To confess the holiness of God is to confess that we don't understand God, right? And so to undertake a vow that is consecrated to God means that you're intentionally choosing to be the weird person who lives differently than everyone else around you, and not for any reason, but for God. I learned in junior high it is not a profitable thing to be the weird person doing different things. And I've lived my whole life with that mantra, to the point where when people make strange vows or oaths or live in a strange way, it is a cultural value that we all go, that's weird. We do. And so when you look at the calling of Samson, and you see that God took the Nazarite vow, this vow of consecration, and said, because Samson will live his life according to the Nazarite vow in consecration to me, I will bless him with the strength to do these things. We don't have a concept for this because we have no concept for that vow. And if I were to ask you to shoot from the hip and tell me if a Christian can undertake a vow like that today, you would say no. And I'm telling you, I think you might be wrong. Please don't grow out your hair and say, Ben made me do it. But, you see, the passage that we all know, can almost quote it, is Matthew 5:37, when Jesus says, do not take a vow at all. Let what you say simply be yes or no, and anything more comes from the evil one, right? That's the one. Don't make a vow. Don't make a promise. Let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. Don't make a vow. And what Jesus is saying here is that we have to be people of deep integrity, but what he's not saying is we cannot be people who consecrate ourselves to God. Now, we are called to a higher calling. And in many ways, when the Bible describes us as a royal priesthood, it is describing us as a people, a whole people that are consecrated to God. But in Acts chapter 18, verse 18, it says, after this, Paul stayed many days longer, and then took leave of the brothers and set sail for Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila. At Cenchrea, he had cut his hair, for he was under an oath. That's weird. For somebody who doesn't make an oath and just has his yes as his yes and his no as his no, that's weird. Acts 21, verse 23. Do therefore what we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Take these men and purify yourself along with them, and pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads. Here's the thing. And here's why this is so uncomfortable to talk about. We've lived for so long living a life that says that God does not call holiness and consecration from his people, that it is uncomfortable for us to say some people may take vows of consecration and holiness to God. And yet, in the New Testament, we see people doing this. Paul, nonetheless. Shall we be people of integrity with our yes be yes and our no be no? Absolutely. Should we be a holy people? Yes. But I'm telling you, we wrestle with the idea of consecration because if I consecrate my life to God, it means that for a period of time, I'm going to be crafting my life so that it does not bring me pleasure and comfort. And I've lived my whole life crafting my life to give me pleasure and comfort. That's why I choose the cars that I choose, the couch that I choose, the house that I choose, the neighborhood that I choose, the church that I work with that I choose. That's how my whole life has been spent. It's been spent saying, I want to live my life crafted for my own pleasure and ease. And to consecrate myself from God to God means to choose to live my life differently than all of the rest of that. We don't get the vow because we just don't get this whole lifestyle at all. Which leaves me probably with more with a question than an answer. But the question is this: why? Why do we live in a context where our faith is best expressed as long as you're comfortable with it? As long as it best serves you. And we put ornaments on this. I bought this really nice house, but I'm going to use it for Jesus, right? Yeah, but it's really nice for you between the 2 points, right? The idea of consecration means saying no to myself and living my life differently for God. It is my prayer that at a base level, as God's people, we reject the idea that we can live our lives just for ourselves, for our comfort, for our convenience. I don't know how I feel about Christians taking Nazarite vows, to be perfectly honest, but I see some examples in the New Testament of people taking vows, giving themselves over to the Lord. And that's something I have personally never witnessed or experienced in the church in any great depth. And I believe the reason I have not seen it is because we have never taught about it and grappled with the idea of sanctification, with the idea of holiness, and the idea of consecration. So, maybe, if there's anything we can learn from Samson, it is that when we commit our lives not for ourselves but for God's purposes, God can take it and he can use it in ways he would never have been able to if I was just living life for me. Because that's Samson's story.